reporting, in communicating, because this is really, really important. And therefore, it was wonderful to see that this morning in the coverage from Gordon Brown, he said in Guardian today, in a quote, that he has now made up his mind and will come to Copenhagen. It's only a handful of heads of states that has committed so far, and the first one committing was the Polish Prime Minister. I don't know if there's anyone from Poland here, but yeah, I'm sorry, but I have to say he's probably the only one we could live without coming to Copenhagen, I would say. Because, of course, he is systematically trying to undermine a good agreement in Copenhagen and in the EU as well. But for the rest, we would very much like to see them. And then the good news from Japan, that they boosted their reduction commitments from the 8 to 25. Still not enough, but certainly better than before. For us in Greenpeace, we think there are 4 basic scenarios for what will come out of Copenhagen. The first one we call the breakthrough scenario, or the miracle scenario, you could also call it. That is that there actually will be a fair, ambitious, and binding treaty agreed in Copenhagen with the right kind of targets. Unfortunately, as it looks now, we don't think that's very likely at this stage. We'll, of course, love to be surprised, but it doesn't seem that likely at the moment. The second scenario is what we call the foundation scenario. That is that we will, in the Copenhagen Agreement, get some good mechanisms, the right framework, you could say, but that the ambition level and the targets are way too small. The third scenario, which we call the greenwash scenario, is maybe close to the worst case scenario in our mind. That is that politicians that shows up, heads of states that shows up, manage to sell it to the public that they made a good agreement but haven't made a good agreement. This we, unfortunately, at this stage, consider most likely. And there are many ways that that can happen. And the fourth scenario is the collapse, that it's very clear that they show up, the delegation, but that they won't reach any agreement, and the meeting collapse, and a new meeting will be held shortly after. But the third scenario about the greenwash, I mean, for me, this is extremely concerning that we could get in that situation, because that would basically bring us to a situation where it's very, very difficult to see when the process will be restarted or when it will get back on track. It could be years. I mean, we know from some of the other global deals that has been postponed indefinitely, almost, because of this kind of greenwash situations. So for us, we see that as if that happens, it's a huge challenge for us to communicate why we think it's greenwash and why we think it's not a good scenario or a good outcome of Copenhagen that we've seen. Okay, I'll say a few words about what we in Greenpeace are doing about this. We have, of course, been working with climate change issues for the past 25 years, from the period around Rio and before that, and have increasingly focused more and more of our resources on it. Right now, we have in Greenpeace around 800 or 900 people out of our 1,800 staff in the world that is working with the COP and is trying to put as much pressure as possible on the political layers. We're doing that through a variety of tactics and a variety of channels, and I'll just go through some of them. One of the things that we are focusing a lot on right now is to still bring images and stories from the impacts of climate change. I mean, even though that in many parts of the world there is a very high level of knowledge about it, we still have a situation in Europe where approximately 30 or 40% of the population thinks that climate change has nothing to do with man-made causes and are disputing the IPCC outcome. I think this is pretty high figures, basically. And I know this is just Europe. I know in the US, and if you go further away, it's of course much different. I mean, then it's even lower figures that we have. So we still have a huge challenge in communicating what is happening out there in the world. Right now we have one of our ships, the Arctic Sunrise, in the Arctic region. It's been 3 months in Greenland, where we have visited some of the outlet glaciers from the ice sheet, together with scientists, simply measuring. We were up there in 2005 as well. We were up there in 2001, and we have, with the same scientists, a number of results that we can now report back on what is happening in 4 years later, 8 years later, etc. And we find exactly the results that we feared, that the outlet glaciers has picked up even more speed, that the volume of ice going into the oceans is increasing still. The ship has now left Greenland and is in Svalbard and the area north of Svalbard, doing science work together with some Norwegian scientists and American scientists on the sea ice coverage in that region. So the impact work and showing the urgency is something that we are using a lot of our time and resources on at the moment, unfortunately, because we would have hoped that we would not have to do that at the moment. We have another ship tour also talking about impacts in the Pacific at the moment, visiting some of the island states that is in danger of being non-existent in a few decades. And basically bringing stories, bringing images, bringing, basically stories from these areas to the rest. But we don't have a lot of channels to communicate it through, so if you guys have an idea, then please help out. We are also spending a lot of time mobilizing or engaging with people. For me, I think this is one of the things we have to do. I can't claim that we are particularly successful at it, unfortunately. I would love if we were able to do more and have a larger impact. Greenpeace and Oxfam and Christian Aid and WWF and a lot of other organizations has gone together in a mobilization initiative called Tick. You may know it. But still, I mean, we have a global count of only 1.2 million. I mean, I don't think that's quite impressive compared to the challenge in front of us. We have our own mobilization initiative also in Greenpeace. We call it U-Turn the Earth, and right now the key asks of that one and also the Tick is put maximal pressure on your heads of states and get them to Copenhagen, because again, that's the only sure thing we know right now that can really make a difference for an agreement. Greenpeace is also doing what we have always been doing. We are fighting and we are trying to confront what we call the bad solution or the bad sides of energy production. This is pictures from last week where we confronted tar sands operations in Canada through activities. This is work that will continue, tar sands being the absolute most filthy way of producing energy, where you consume up to 2/3 of the energy just in the extraction process of getting tar sands out of the earth. And yeah, basically a mess no matter how you look at it, also from a local environment perspective. We are spending a lot of resource and time confronting the coal industry as well, putting coal up as one of the things that is definitely part of the age of stupid and the things that should be phased out. Oops. And we are promoting what we think is the right solutions. Together with scientists from particularly Germany and Austria, we have produced a global energy scenario which has a lot of subsections, which is on local scenarios and regional scenarios, that basically says how it can be done. How can we actually get our emissions, our CO2 emissions down to 25 to 30% below what we have today in 2020, and how can we get it down to approximately 0 in 2050. These scenarios shows that it's possible also with the technology we have today, and that's of course the key thing that we use when we go out and talk about what is the right solutions, what investments are needed, as Søren spoke about before. I mean, the need for investments and where these investments falls is of course the key.